Finally, something to explain the tricky bishop pair. Hello and welcome. This is the first video in my simplified series where we take a look at complex concepts and really simplify them down into easy to follow practical tips that you can apply in your very next game. So today we're talking about the bishop pair. I'm going to change your perspective of this bishop pair so you finally know and understand why it's considered a small advantage. So today we'll cover number 1, why it's an advantage, number 2, how to acquire this advantage, 3, how to actively use it when you have it, there's 2 ways to do so, and number 4, how to fight against it. So let's go. So the first thing we have to cover is why is this even an advantage? As we see in the current position, it's a little bit obvious that the bishop pair controls a lot more than the knight pair. Obviously in this position that's because the knight pair is at the edge of the board, but usually that's the case. So you can see how these bishops paired together, especially on adjacent diagonals, cover a ton of the board, whereas these knights don't work very well together. So this is what we call an anti-knight strategy, because bishops usually have a great time dominating knights, while the reverse isn't true. A knight has a very tough time trying to dominate a bishop. So instead of bishop pair versus knight pair, a much more common scenario is bishop pair versus bishop and knight. Now, in this case, we're just going to use the fact that they don't have one bishop that we do. So this is the sort of perspective change that you need to keep in mind. So in this case, they don't have a light square bishop, which means automatically all the light squares on the board belong to us, technically. So we're going to look for battles on the light squares. In this case, that will be the queen side because the enemy pawns are stuck. So we can notice white has a big advantage because these pawns are stuck on light squares. So we're going to play bishop b7 here, and even though they can temporarily defend this, notice how they have to do it from a dark square, because that's how the knight works. It can only cover the opposite color. And that's where our other bishop comes into play, because we can often play a removing the defender tactic and win these pawns. So in this particular position, bishop takes c7, bishop takes here, and there's no stopping the fall of the second pawn. After which we're just in a winning opposite color bishop endgame. We get our king over here, and we push these pawns until they queen. Essentially, if you have the bishop pair advantage, you're supposed to wait until the endgame, where the bishop pair really shines. In the middle game, it's much harder to use it, but if you're in the middle game with the bishop pair, make sure to trade off all the rooks, all the queens, everything else, until you're left with this, where you can really demonstrate the power of the bishop pair. So now you might say, wait, Sandro, hold on. But in this position against the knight pair, we can't just go bishop b7 and win, so how do we win here? Well, as I said before, the point of the bishop pair is to have an insane amount of control over the board. So in this case, we apply an anti-knight strategy, as we usually do, so these knights will not do anything for the rest of the game, meaning our king is free to just go here and take all the pawns. After that, helping our own pawns promote. So that is the value of the bishop pair, but now let's see how you actually grab the bishop pair. How do you come to this advantage? So we're going to take a look at our next position, some sort of middle game, and first thing to know is that sometimes your opponents are going to help you out in the opening, so they're going to do, bishop g5, and then you play h6, they're going to take for no reason and just give you the bishop pair. But in other times, you're going to have to work hard to get the bishop pair. So let's see one such example. It's black to play right now. Pause the video and try to figure out how black by force gets the bishop pair advantage. I'm spoiling the solution in 3, 2, 1. So black plays knight to d5, hitting the bishop, and white doesn't want to give up the bishop pair, so they're going to go bishop b2, at which point we go knight f4 and fork the queen and bishop. So white doesn't lose a piece because they have the move queen e3, but we're still very happy to capture this strong bishop on d3 and get the bishop pair. Again, why is this an advantage? Because now they don't have a light square bishop. So most of our advantage lies in the bishop that they don't have. So that's the perspective change that we already talked about. And because this bishop has no counterpart, there's no way for white to trade it off, which means it will be a great attacker. So let's see an example position where it's not obvious at all how you're supposed to use the bishop pair. So again, if you want, you can pause the video and it's white to play here. How would you attempt to use your bishop pair advantage? I'm spoiling the solution in 3, 2, 1. So as we said before, you should look to exploit the advantage in the bishop that they don't have. So technically, because they don't have a light square bishop, all the light squares on the board belong to you. If there's any sort of tactical battle on the light squares, we expect this bishop to be the decider. So we should look to fight on the light squares, and in fact, we can see some open diagonals over here. So the move is e5 to make available the move bishop e4. So the knight has to go somewhere, let's say knight e7, and bishop e4 wins the exchange. Not the full rook, because black has knight a6, but after takes, we're up in exchange, and we transformed our bishop pair advantage into an exchange up advantage. Quick recap before we continue. So far we covered why the bishop pair is an advantage, we covered how to grab the bishop pair, and we covered one of the ways to use the bishop pair. We said, use the bishop that they don't have. Now, here we have the second way of using the bishop pair. You can combine them on adjacent diagonals to attack the king. And the bishop pair works wonders when it attacks the king, because one of the most common uses for a bishop is to sacrifice itself for a kingside pawn to ignite the flame of attack. So you're going to find many such patterns in chess, the most famous one being the Greek gift sacrifice, where basically you have a knight on f3, let's imagine that, and you go bishop takes h7 check, king has to take, knight g5 check, king has to go back, and you go queen h5, and from there queen h7, mate is usually unstoppable. So again, if you want to pause the video and try to solve this position as a tactical puzzle, I'm spoiling the solution in 3, 2, 1. So this is actually a double bishop sacrifice, which is pretty insane, but here's how it works. You sacrifice one bishop with check, they have to take, queen comes in with check, and now it looks like we have no follow-up, but the other bishop can sacrifice itself. And now the point is, they usually have to have a rook lift, but you don't do it immediately. First you go queen g5 check, and then after the king goes to the h-file, it's all isolated over here, so now the rook lift ends the game. Because if you were to rook lift immediately here, they would just go, I don't know, rook g8 and escape through the f8 square. So lining up the bishop pair to the enemy king is usually very powerful, and there are many checkmating patterns that involve doing so. So now the last part we have to cover is how to fight against the bishop pair. So now we're playing as black against the bishop pair here, and there's a concept you need to know of trading the brother bishop. That's what it's called. So you basically take the same bishop that you have and you trade it off. This is very powerful because at the end position they don't have a bishop pair anymore. If that's successful, then they just have, you know, bishop versus knight, but that's anyone's game. So try and pause the video and figure out how to trade these two. I'm spoiling the solution in 3, 2, 1. So you might be thinking bishop f6, but unfortunately that ruins our pawn structure. So maybe white is claiming that they transformed their advantage into another advantage. Transform the bishop pair into the pawn structure advantage. So we don't really want that. We want to trade these, but not by ruining our pawns. So you might be thinking, oh, knight d7, bishop f6, so that we can recapture with a knight. But unfortunately, our knight is busy protecting h7. The move is queen d8, right there. And after queen d8, we're going to recapture with our queen, not spoiling our pawn structure, and we have no problems. So white plays something, we go bishop f6, they take, we take, and we are 100% okay. No more bishop pair for the opponent. So a quick recap of everything we covered. We covered why the bishop pair is an advantage. We said that as a result of it, you have more control over the board, especially when using them on adjacent diagonals. And we talked about the anti-knight strategy. That's number 1. Number 2 is how to acquire the bishop pair advantage. We said trade one of your knights for the opponent's bishop. Sometimes your opponent helps you, sometimes you have to do it on your own. Number 3, how to actively use when you have the bishop pair. We said 2 ways. The first one is use the bishop that they don't have and play on that color square. And the second way, pair the bishops together for a kingside attack. And the last thing we covered is how to fight against the bishop pair. We said trade off the brother bishop, the same color bishop, at which point they have no more bishop pair. Small bonus for those of you who stayed until the end, if you're playing white in this position and your opponent tries to trade off the bishop pair, as we saw, you have to just keep it until the end game. So remember this, because f3 is actually not such a good move, because now they have to trade due to the pin. So a much better attempt for white to try and win this position is to move the rook out of the way so that they can meet bishop f6 with bishop c1. It is true this bishop is a little bit ugly, but the bishop pair stays alive and we have potential to reach that endgame that we want. Drop a comment down below telling me what you think of the video, like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you soon. Take it easy.